So once upon a time, Space Invaders, by Taito, was unleashed upon the world in 1978 and gave birth to a genre of video game, the space shooter where you shoot things in space. It was somewhat popular and merited a number of sequels, ports, and conversions and things of that nature for a variety of different video game consoles and formats. Suffice it to say, it's a game with an enduring legacy behind it, and it's somewhat of a big thing. In 1999, a remade version of Space Invaders would grace the Sony PlayStation, the PC, the Game Boy Color, and the version we're going to look at today, the Nintendo 64. For the most part, the core gameplay of the original Space Invaders is pretty much intact. You guide your missile launcher left and right and have to clear all the invaders before they land or kill you, whichever comes first. Gameplay is still very much in 2D or 2.5D as the cool kids call it. Differences between this one and the old one is that there are different invader formations, new weapon upgrades, new backdrops, new intermissions, and new bosses, and new invader designs as well. But other than that, it's still good old Space Invaders. And that's actually a good thing, believe it or not. Whenever someone tries to remake a classic arcade game, there's a tendency to completely change the game into something it was originally not. And the end result is a game that only bears a vague resemblance to the source material. With Space Invaders, Activision and Z-Axis opted to take the original game and make some updates and upgrades to the overall concept, while not messing with the overall format. Sure, you can now collect power-ups that include shields, special weapons, and other things. The game introduces new enemies with varied attack patterns and setups, and every so often you'll encounter a boss invader that you'll have to take down, and these bastards can take a beating, let me tell you that. You can have a second player join in and help out, and you could save your progress overall. But those are additions over what is essentially the same overall gameplay mechanics of that original 78 arcade game. Invaders are descending and you have to clear them out before they land. Same deal, and it plays rather nicely actually. Control in Space Invaders is rather simple and straightforward. The D-pad or analog stick can move your turret left or right with virtually no difference in handling between the two control schemes, so there's really no advantage of using the analog stick, it's just there just for the sake of being there. While you have one button for shooting your standard laser cannon and another button to execute your special attack assuming you have one and that it's ready to go. Not much else to it really. Controls are responsive, virtually no lag or delay in button inputs. Your turret moves about smoothly and somewhat slowly, but never to a point where you might feel impossibly overwhelmed. Space Invaders does pose a bit of a challenge here, though nowhere near the depths of the arcade game. The first few levels aren't as bleak as one would think. They're easy enough to get you into the game and its mechanics, but eventually that difficulty will start ramping up, and it no doubt gets a bit challenging in the later levels. It's nowhere near the stiff difficulty of the original, but it's still not a walk in the park. Visually speaking, Space Invaders looks pretty good, nothing outstanding or anything, but it gets the job done. You have some nicely rendered planetary backdrops that vary from planet to planet, although not by much. There's a wide variety of enemy types that look fairly good, considering they're not that huge to begin with. Bosses are somewhat decent looking. It looks fine for what it is, and it isn't anything amazing, but it gets the job done, I suppose. The sound isn't anything to harp on either. Space Invaders boasts a rather generic sounding techno-ish soundtrack that does nothing for me personally. It's sort of just there and it's often drowned out by the sounds of interstellar warfare anyway, which almost sounds just as generic. To put it simply, the game has sound for the sake of having sound, and that's all there is to it. It sounds alright for what it is, don't get me wrong, but I'm just not feeling it. Generally speaking, remaking a classic arcade title usually has mixed results. Some remakes respect the source material and are better games for it, others don't. Space Invaders is a remake that is done well, retaining the classic arcade sensibilities of the original game, while adding just enough to keep it interesting and fast-paced. This isn't reinventing the wheel or anything, nor is it doing anything revolutionary, just putting a different twist to the formula, and it worked fairly well for the most part. Now, back when this was brand spanking new, this probably would not have been worth the money compared to some of the more notable titles on the Nintendo 64, but nowadays it's cheap enough that it at least merits a playthrough or two. Not a bad game overall.